I think we're going to get started now with the panel discussion. And we're going to loosen up the format a little bit here. I've got our panelists coming up. I will introduce them. To my immediate left is Emily Ketterer, who is now an editor at Hannah News Service, but is the former executive editor of the Franklin, the student newspaper here at Franklin College. And she'll be talking about the story that she covered here. Seated next to her, whom you've already met, is Alex Walters, administration reporter at the State News at Michigan State University. To his left is Cole Reynolds, who is print managing editor for the Daily Northwestern at Northwestern University. And at the end is Kate Sharon, who is the statewide business reporter at Inside Indiana Business, a former Pulliam Fellow and reporter at the Indiana Daily Student at Indiana University. They have a variety of experiences talking about covering traumatic issues on college campuses. The way we're going to shift the format is I'm taking a handheld mic and I'm going to move down to the floor. It's been a long day, and it's been an emotional day with a lot of these sessions. So we're thinking the more we can make this a discussion, the better. So when you have a question at any point, throw up a hand or just yell out, "Hey, John," and I will come over to you and we'll present the question to our panel. But I'm going to start, grab the microphone first, by asking, and we'll start with Emily, to talk about the story that sort of defined their experience at college so far, that was the source of some angst. Emily?
Is this on? Okay. So I was the co-executive editor of the Franklin during the 2019-2020 school year. And as everyone knows, a lot happened in 2020. But our 2020 started off, for those of you who don't go to Franklin College, we have a January term where we are not everyone's on campus, and people are doing internships, studying abroad in Disney World, like I was, taking a class there. And news broke during the middle of January 2020 that our college president had been arrested on sex crime charges, and he had been fired. And we found this out via an email that was sent to everybody in January. I was standing in Disney World when I got the news, and one of my friends was like, somebody called her on FaceTime and said, did you see the email about President Minor? That's so messed up. And then we all were like looking at our phones, and then immediately I had to go into action. My other co-executive editor was in Japan, studying abroad for the J-term trip. So it was 5 a.m. there. So she was still asleep. And I was coordinating coverage of this event, like breaking news event that I never thought I would have to cover, nor did I know how to cover it, trying to manage it from Disney World, communicating with editors and staffers back here, who a lot of them were at the State House doing our State House file program in January during the legislative session. So, and I was just talking about, with the people at my table, breaking news never happens at a convenient time. It's always at the worst possible time, and you're never prepared for it. And then, so we broke the story. I was on my phone the whole time, editing, writing from my cell phone because I didn't have a laptop with me in the Star Wars land at Disney World. And then when we got back in January, toward the end of January, I was one of two students who went with John up to Door County, Wisconsin, which was where President Minor was arrested because he had a court hearing. And I was probably the first student that he saw, after the news had come out that he had been arrested. It was kind of an awkward encounter the first time. we saw him because we were going out, me and the other student, Victoria, we were going out to get our camera equipment, and we just happened to walk past him walking into the building, and we like made eye contact with him, and we didn't know what to do. We were, when you don't know how to react to a situation, I don't know if anybody else has experienced this, and we started laughing, but like not in like we thought it was funny, but we were like nervous, like traumatized, like, oh my gosh, like this is like not how we expected this to go down, like to see him for the first time. So we were just in the parking lot laughing, like also kind of crying a little bit. I don't know how much more you want me to continue, John.
I'll tell you, we can pick up, because there's a follow-up to that first one that I want to come back to. Let's let Alex and get everybody on the board here, and then we'll start the conversation, okay? Alex.
Yeah. Sorry, what's the question?
Oh, the question is basically, and I know you've probably talked more than enough about the shooting at Michigan State and your role in it, but this is a new audience online and all of that, so if you wouldn't mind.
No, happy to talk more about it. So this February, we had a mass shooting at Michigan State University's campus. Covered that firsthand sort of in the field just by like a mix of luck and coincidence. Was kind of right there when it happened, and then was in the safe room with everybody who had witnessed it, who were working actually at the time with the student who was one of the students who was killed. And then, covered it for the next couple weeks kind of nonstop. And then since then, just, there's a lot of follow-up, and there's continual grieving, and there's policy changes and different stuff like that. So I've been sticking with it.
Cole.
Okay, I just am not using it right, clearly. This summer was a turbulent one for Northwestern. And it started out normally, but by the end, kind of one of our flagship sports, our football team, had its coach been fired, and it was because of some work that I was lucky to be a part of with three other reporters. We had detailed a really sexual and brutal practice of hazing that upperclassmen members of the football team had subjected underclassmen to, and it was over the course of about 3 days, we published two long form stories, one about kind of the hazing and one about kind of a racist team environment that had persisted in the mid to late 2000s under the same head coach who was a legendary figure at Northwestern, a beloved figure at Northwestern. And so over those 72 hours and kind of like 2 or 3 weeks of reporting afterwards, we had we had uncovered this practice, and how I see it is kind of given a platform for a lot of players throughout many generations of Northwestern football to kind of come forward and share their story, and something that it's a credit to their bravery. We're really willing and ready to do, and it felt like something that was needing to come out, and finally it did this summer.
Kate.
Yeah, okay. Sorry, I have to clear my throat a little bit. So in 2021, fall of 2021 is when I did the bulk of my reporting. I had received a tip earlier in the year about a music student who was allegedly supposed to be expelled and had supposedly committed sexual assault. I looked into it starting in August, and the next 6 months were some of the hardest months I've ever had in my life. I'll talk about it later, but I essentially found through fact-finding and interviewing process, I talked to 22 different people, 2 of which alleged that the star musician at the IU Music School sexually assaulted them. Through documents that I obtained, I found that the university did not follow their word. They stated that the student came back on campus, he violated his suspension. Or sorry, I'll back up. The first woman that I talked to, she went through the Title IX process, which, if you've seen anything about Indiana University's Title IX process, is that there are issues and that women have to go through months and months of retelling their story and trying to convince people that their story is true. And at the end of the day, it is essentially, 50% is the, you're more likely than not to do something, or this thing is more likely than not to have happened, or something like that. She went through this process. This was back in 2016, and the university found that Chris Parker was more likely than not to have assaulted her. So he was suspended. This was in her freshman year. She dropped out of school. She wasn't able to go back into school until I was reporting on this. So she was out of school for about 4 or 5 years. She gave me a document, and the document stated that if he was found to have violated his suspension, he would have been expelled, received criminal charges, or both. And we found that did not happen. So we found that the university did not follow their word when it comes to this particular case of sexual assault. I talked to so many people that were involved, people that were friends, people who said that this was a pattern of violence, and eventually through just kind of rigorous source building and talking to people and making people feel comfortable with me. In multiple interviews, one woman came forward and said that she was raped. And I went into that interview not knowing that was going to be what was talked about. And that was a key part of the story that most people who were talking about this and saying that he was innocent did not know about. Sorry, I'm kind of shaking because most people don't really know what the story did to me in the process of fact-finding. So there's that part of the story where I wrote the story.
If I could jump in for a second?
Yeah.
When you say you're shaking and most people don't know, what did reporting on the story do to you at that point? I don't want to lose that, because that's something I think a lot of the people in the audience who are young journalists don't realize. These stories are going to have impact on the people who report them, too. So could you talk a little bit about what it did to you?
Yeah. I think the only two people who really know the effect that this had on me is my boyfriend, who at the time, we were not dating at this point, it was my editor. So he went through that whole process with me, and then the process afterward, and my therapist. So people don't really know that I had nightmares pretty much every night for about 3 months about getting the story wrong, about all the things that couldn't be included in the story, because the story was almost 7,000 words, and my initial draft was 15,000. So carrying the weight of the things that need to be cut for brevity, the things that people just tell you in confidence, and going through those interview processes where no interview was shorter than 45 minutes. It was really, really hard, and I'm not really an emotions talk about it person. I'm trying to be more of that, but that was really, really difficult. And because I didn't talk about it and I didn't ask for help, I pretty much failed a class. I had to retake it. But it was definitely I was not taking care of myself, and I was so entrenched in being a perfectionist and making sure that the stories of these people who gave me so much trust was represented accurately. And I fact-checked it because I was unwell. I fact-checked it 15 times because of the weight of the allegations. And also, Chris Parker told people that he was going to sue me. So I was a little bit afraid of that, too.
And in some ways, all of your comments have set up part of the reason we wanted to do the panel discussion this way is sort of the guiding light of trauma journalism. Frank Ochberg suggested this panel discussion because there are particular stresses on student journalists, the fact that you have a dual role. You are journalists, but you're also students within the academic community in which you work, and it sounds like that added to some of the stress you were experiencing. I want to talk, I know Emily's got a story because I was there about it, but I want to start with Cole. I mean, did you feel that? Because it's not like when you're on a college community and you're going to classes that you can avoid confronting the consequences of your reporting.
Well, I racked up like a enormous DoorDash bill while reporting this story, and it was because we were all on campus, and so we were all in the dining hall. Eating at one dining hall. It was only open this summer, and so actually some of my student journalism role was the dual hat type of thing was diminished because it was summer and I wasn't taking classes, but you are on that campus and you're reminded that you're in a community, and some of the things that made, I feel like, our reporting process special were also the things that made it difficult. You know that you can see the impact that your words have immediately in your peers. You can see kind of the different emotions, the different processes that your students are going through for processing something like this, and so we tried as a staff to just kind of avoid that, right? We didn't go to the dining halls because not that we were necessarily afraid for our safety, because I think nobody from our school really threatened us, but we were cognizant that there was a ripple going through campus. And one, we didn't want to be swayed by it, but also two, we didn't want to put ourselves out there immediately as people were going through a whole slate of emotions with this story. And so we stayed in our newsroom, we ordered many pizzas, and had a big DoorDash bill to pay.
But in some ways that meant, to do the reporting, you had to cut yourself off from a part of the college experience.
Of course, and it was temporary, but and look, we're still young reporters and we're still learning, and it was a learning experience to say, how can you exist in a community while also asking tough questions of it, while also telling tough stories about it. And it wasn't something that we, coming into the story, really, I don't think knew how to do, or at least not me. And so it was, as the story's unfolding, you're asking yourself, how do I exist here? How do I present myself here with kind of this baggage? And I think it's a question that I've been wrestling with ever since then. And it's a question that it's amplified when you're a student reporter, but it's not unique to student reporters. Local journalists, for example, all the time have to deal with the impact of their journalism for good and for bad. And because you're not parachuting in and jumping back out, you're living for days and weeks, months and years with the impact of your story. And those questions, those experiences are something that I'm wrestling with as I move through my college experience, but I'm also grateful for having to answer those questions now in college before I go off to I guess the real world, even though college is the real world.
Your experiences strike me as having been pretty real already, but Alex, it wasn't summer for you. I mean, when your story broke, classes were going on, people were on campus. What was that like? Because you are still a student.
Yeah, I mean, it was a weird thing. On one hand, I think we could cover it more empathetically and also just more truthfully because, we were experiencing a lot of the things that we were writing about. I mean, there are just things that we got right that other outlets got wrong, not by any necessary fault, but just by we were there every day. But there's a lot of uncomfortable things about being a student journalist. I mean, with the shooting less so. That was, I think, more of a unifying thing. And also, I felt like I got kind of more leeway to wear both hats during that time. But there have been, there was a guy, he was the dean of students at MSU, and we reported that he, at a conference in Chicago, had sexually assaulted a woman in a bar, and then he resigns and he gets this kind of like cushy resignation agreement. And then we reveal, I found out a couple months later and wrote a story that at his last job at a school, Grand Valley State University, he left while being investigated for sexually assaulting a student through, it's a series of deficiencies in like Title IX process. They call it pass the harasser. And it's like you write all that and it has like an impact and they talk about policy changes, but then I'm in like an appointment with my academic advisor. And he's like, you know, I knew Anthony, and like these two were like friends and colleagues and stuff. And it's like just a weird position that I don't know if you'd necessarily be put in as a professional reporter, to like put on your student hat, but then be introducing yourself and acting, interacting with people who kind of know you by your actions with the reporter hat on, and maybe don't think super highly of you because of it, because they might not love the repercussions of your reporting. But I also don't think it's a bad thing, because like if you're like a local news reporter, I mean, you want to be a part of the community that you cover. And I don't necessarily think it would say the best things about your reporting if you felt like you were ostracized from the community that you were covering because of it. And so I don't know, I think it's good and bad, like to have two hats to put on.
And I want to pick up on that a little bit, because I do think there is a distinction. I mean, there are ways to disappear when you're a professional reporter that are harder. You know, I mean, you caught a break at some level, Cole, that the story broke during the summer when no one was there. If you'd had to attend classes, yes, you could have had your meals door dashed in, but you were still going to have to confront some students who were going to be happy about the reporting, some who were not. Probably there were quite a few who were not happy about the reporting, because you say the coach was a beloved figure there. Don't worry, Emily, I am coming to you.
Yeah, and I think that it's because Pat Fitzgerald was such a beloved figure, but one thing that I want to make clear about our reporting is that it wasn't ever about Pat Fitzgerald. I think that a lot of people will look at the story and look at its outcome, that he was fired, and say that the story was about Pat Fitzgerald, but it was really about what was placing the reader in the locker room and letting them make the judgments, and so the kind of cards fell where they fell in terms of Pat Fitzgerald. But it was never our intention to go after Pat Fitzgerald or make this story about Pat Fitzgerald, even though it ended up becoming about him. But so a lot of people, and a lot of, I think, alumni who had really fond memories of Pat Fitzgerald. This was somebody who had carried Northwestern to basically its only football glory in its history, dragged it out of the doldrums, the dungeon of college football in the 90s, had come back and coached multiple 10-win seasons, led to some of our first bowl wins. Like, there was, I think, one person on campus who could really do no wrong, and that was Pat Fitzgerald. And because as a community member, you can also recognize that too, and something that we took, I think, pause in our reporting and recognize that, like, this is someone that we're reporting on, and all of these ugly allegations about Pat Fitzgerald, but also recognize how kind of much of an impact he's had on the community. And so when I think alums was the one group that didn't quite get what we were doing, had thought that we didn't understand who Pat Fitzgerald was, or didn't understand that he had credit, and not all of them, just a group of them would reach out to us and say, what have you done to this man? Like, why would you do this? And we would have to write back or say back, like, it's not our responsibility to Pat Fitzgerald. And we do appreciate his legacy. We do understand what he's meant to you, to this community for decades, but also you have to hold both of these truths at the same time. And here's one that has been hidden for 20 years. And I think most people on campus got that, but there were certain people who thought that the credit that Pat Fitzgerald had bought with the school and the community was enough to cover him in the situation. And it was just about kind of reframing that for as many people as possible.
Emily, we're going to pick the story back up with when you were in Sturgeon Bay and you came back in at the initial hearing.
Yeah.
And so that you don't think I'm ducking responsibility, I sent her out to try to talk to Tom Miner. And what happened?
So we had gone through the court hearing, which didn't last that long, and he walked out, and then I followed him out. And I had talked to him before. I'd interviewed him several times on campus. Seeing him there, it was like a completely different person. He had a completely different demeanor. He just looked devastated, crushed. I mean, yeah. So I approached him. I said, Dr. Miner, would you like to give a comment or something? I don't remember what exactly I said. And he turned around and he looked at me, and he had visibly had tears in his eyes, and he didn't say a word. He just shook his head. And then his attorney stepped in and said, we aren't going to comment at this time. And it was just mustering up the courage to do that was a lot. I was already kind of scared, intimidated by him anyway when he was here as president, just because it's the president of the college. I was always scared to do an interview with him anyway, or nervous. But this was just a whole other level. I've never had to approach somebody, that had such grave accusations against him. And to clarify for people who don't know, there wasn't an actual victim in this crime. He was charged with enticing a minor, and it was actually an undercover police officer from Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin, who was messaging him on a dating app, posing as a 15-year-old boy. But at the time when we found out about the story, we didn't have the police report, so we didn't know if there was an actual victim or not. So that was hard to deal with at first as well, and I was on a class trip, and I couldn't go home, and kind of going off the student hat, I couldn't go home and hide or go anywhere. I was stuck with my peers and my professors on a school trip, and I was staying in hotel rooms with them. And we were kind of all going through this together. And there weren't a lot of people on campus, but I wasn't here, so I don't really know what the dynamic was with that.
Well, I was going to jump in real quickly because I've sensed a theme here, and I'll start with you, Emily. When you started reporting for the Franklin on the minor thing, and some of it, I think it was Alex who said, because the paper at Michigan State University got everything right, got the facts right. People were paying attention to it and didn't make some of the mistakes that, let's say, national media that had parachuted in. And this, for a campus this size, this was a big story. I mean, Franklin College made its way into the New York Times, CNN, the Washington Post, all of the major newspapers, in a way that colleges really don't like to make national news. But you found suddenly that the readership for the Franklin exploded online, that everyone was going there. And I guess what I heard from all of you is that you kind of struggled with the weight of the stories that you were reporting, coming to terms with the consequences of them. And at least what I'm hearing from you here, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that there was an awful lot of internal pressure there, that you felt a real sense of moral responsibility that added to the stress and the difficulty. I'll start with Emily on that one because I kind of teed her up, but I want to hear each of you speak to that and how it affected you.
There definitely was a lot of pressure because I think, in my mind, we're the student newspaper. We have to cover this, and we are the ones who can do the best job at covering this because we had news outlets that had never even been here before or hardly come here to cover any news about Franklin College, showing up on our campus and trying to interview just random students, and only getting half the story about, who Tom Miner was. And so it did feel like a duty to make sure we told it right. And I felt like the whole campus was watching us in the beginning, and then the state was too. People were reading our stories because we had some of the most detailed reports. Just because we were students, we know this school. We knew him before he was arrested. So there was a pressure, and then throughout the whole process, going to Wisconsin, there was that pressure to continue covering this. And I mean, it got to the point where we were, I think, the only outlet here that continued to cover the whole story all the way through. So there was that pressure too, that we're the only people that are telling this story. So we need to get it right. I wasn't here through the end of it because I graduated, but it was also, passing it down to the next generation of students to cover some who weren't even here when he was arrested, who finished out when he finally was sentenced. So yeah, there definitely was a lot of pressure in being around my peers and people asking me about it, and wanting to know what's going on, and when I'm going back to Sturgeon Bay, and or just people that don't go to school here approaching me or asking me about it sometimes. They're like, didn't you cover the story where your president was arrested? So yeah, there is definitely the pressure when you have a lot of people watching you for a story that made national news.
Kate, I saw you nodding your head the most emphatically when I talked about the weight of...
Yes. This is something I've thought about a lot, especially like when I'm looking forward to my career, is that I think that I am very privileged just to begin with to be a white person in America. And I think I'm even more privileged that I have not been sexually assaulted. I am not a victim of domestic violence. I did not grow up in an abusive home. And I think that because I don't come, not that you are damaged if you have that kind of trauma, but I think that I am equipped mentally to be able to tell some of those stories, that I don't have to fight through that, and I can be a voice for other people who maybe don't feel comfortable doing that. Because I've talked to a lot of people, and I'm actually working on like a story about domestic violence right now, where because of those experiences, like that violence and that threat of violence, even if it is not something that is tangible, that it's something that you're just afraid of, can be completely demoralizing, and it can break people down and make people feel like they can't do anything, and it can take a few steps back. And the source that I'm working with, it's taken us a few months, and that is not anything to do with like her not being able to respond to messages. It's because it's hard to process. And I feel like because I don't have that type of experience, that I want to be a voice for other people who have. I also think as student journalists on a campus, there are a lot of stories that don't get told because they're on a college campus. Every year, it is very common at IU's campus to be like, another student got sexually assaulted, and that's it. And that's all you think about. That you get a Clariac report in your email, and you're like, that's a shame. And it happens. There was a period where we got 3 or 4 in a week. And, those stories are just an email. And local media don't have the bandwidth to report on that. Like, I worked at the Herald Times. I worked at our local newspaper. I know they have 4 reporters, and they lost another right after I left. So I think that student journalists have such an insane pressure to cover these stories that they know no one else is going to. And if you don't do it in the correct way, that's the way that the story is going to be told. And that was a huge pressure for me when I was reporting this story out, as well as like directing coverage of sexual assault, which IU's numbers have been rising. So I don't know where I'm going to end this thought, but the twofold, the power of being a student journalist is, there's a lot of feeling like you're representing your community, but then feeling like you're talking to a brick wall, that you're just talking to your community and trying to get people's attention. But yeah.
Alex, I'm going to come back, because one of the things that and as someone who's covered, a a lot of violent crimes, a lot of murders through the years. One of the functions that coverage provides is it does help a community come to terms with something awful that has happened. But that carries with it a heavy weight. I mean, you talked about it, and I could tell, when you talked about the importance of getting it right and all of that there was a sense of duty there. Could you speak about, what the pressure was for you in reporting what is a really important story?
Yeah. Well, and I feel like broadly, I don't know if this is every student publication, but at least at the State News, we write for an audience that's like very much divided. And like, I think, based on my understanding of our audience, maybe like a small part of them are actually like students and faculty on campus every day who are like going through this stuff. And they're a very vocal part of the audience, but they're a smaller one. But more so, we also write for like alumni, I think, who maybe read the State News when they went to MSU. And I don't even know how many alumni, it's a big school. And they read it a lot. And so I think in the shooting particularly, there was a big thing where like a lot of students and faculty on campus, and this is something I talked about this morning at more length, but there became sort of like a disdain for the media in the time after the shooting, just because of a lot of the frustrations with some of the national broadcast media and the way that they were approaching students and treating students. And so there were a lot of discussions of like, is it right to be going up to people and talking to them right now? Is it right to be asking certain questions? Because we did feel such a pushback. But there also is, like you said, sense of duty that I think I felt and we felt towards the part of our audience that wasn't there on campus experiencing it, but care about that campus and that community holds a special place in their heart, that want to know what's going on. And so media is a way for them to do that. So I felt, I think, a particular sense of duty towards those who weren't there, who were still feeling for, I don't know, if it's a place that you care about and you spent time when there's like an event of mass violence like that, I think it can have a real effect on you. And so, yeah, it was a lot of pushing through pushback that was like right in front of us with the people that we were talking to who were very against the media being there whatsoever, but knowing that what we were doing, at least to me, felt very important to people who weren't right there because they still wanted to know what was being done, what was being felt.
Cole, I'm going to come back to you now. One of the things that fascinates me about the Daily Northwestern's coverage is it sounds like there were whispers about this stuff for a long time. It's not like Chicago is devoid of professional journalists. And I'm going to come around because I want everyone, these were all stories that in some ways student journalists were particularly well suited to tell. To report and tell. Do you think, if the Daily Northwestern had not been there, that this story would have been reported? And what does that make you think? I mean,
Well,
yeah.
On that specific question, I actually do think it would have been reported, just because I knew there were some outlets on our tail when we had reported it. But as well or as carefully, I don't know, because going back to the question of pressure, I thought there was a couple different types of pressure, and they pressured us and they affected us as journalists in unique ways. And the first pressure that we felt was a pressure of the story, similar to what you felt. I felt like these are people not much older than me who are trusting me with a story, and knowing how the kind of sports world can work is these people were going out and going out on kind of a limb for to tell this story, or they were putting themselves at risk of embarrassment or shame from kind of the sports community. I've been in locker rooms. I know that talking about this type of thing is not kind of accepted within those spaces a lot of the time. And so you felt pressure from their stories to tell them right, and you try to hold them and you try to appreciate them. And I think that's what spurred on some of our best work and exposed some of our best impulses, I think, as journalists, is to have that pressure and feel that responsibility to tell the story of somebody who's trusting you. And there was another pressure too, and it was one that I tried to actively avoid in this situation, and that was the pressure of the feeling like the world was watching you, of the pressure of seeing the Twitter views go up or the page views go up, feeling beholden to people other than the people you're telling stories, basically. And that's when some feelings of like paranoia would come up, or kind of, or I thought I became unmoored from why I was so passionate about telling this story in the first place. And in those moments, I really had to check myself and say, I'm telling this story for Ramon, which is one of our sources, or I'm telling this story for these players who are trusting me. And if I paid attention to those view counts or the national media attention, that's when I would start making considerations outside of what's accurate. I would start asking, how would this land? Or what would be the effect of this? Not, is this accurate? Or is this the right thing to do? Those are the questions that I wanted to be constantly engaged with, not kind of preoccupied with pleasing this outside audience. So it was partially to check yourself. And then another part of this is student media is unique in covering these stories, because some of the national reporters that we had, it was like they had big teams behind them, teams of editors, legal teams behind them, to check their work, to make sure that they were on task. And when you're a student, like, we were editing and reporting our own work, and we had one lawyer, and we had a couple editors who would maybe cycle through, maybe read some stuff, but the main stories were basically written and edited all by us, and looked over once by somebody on our publishing board who had a law degree, and that's it. And so what makes, I think, student journalism sometimes unique is that you have to trust yourself. Like, you have to say, I've done this reporting, and there's only so much like fact checking you can do, or so much reporting you can do. At some point, you've got to just trust what you've done. You've got to trust your expertise, and it's hard when you feel the eyes of the world watching you, or you feel pressure to tell this story correctly. But one thing that I learned is, like, you have to press send at one point, and it's a big hurdle to clear, and you want to make sure you've done all that work. You're holding the weight of the trust of your sources, but at some point you have to press it, and getting over that hump, especially for the first time with a story like this, was a great experience, but something that it took me hours, honestly, to do.
So let me ask this for everyone. Obviously, all of these stories found audiences. People paid attention to them, which, if we're going to be absolutely honest, isn't always the case with student journalism. That sometimes, you almost feel like you're writing for yourself and your peers, that is not. Did you find that experience of realizing, oh, wow, a lot of people are paying attention to this, comforting or terrifying?
Terrifying, personally.
A little bit of both.
Pardon?
A little bit of both.
A little bit of both? Okay. Well, in what ways?
Mostly terrifying, though.
Mostly terrifying? What was scary about it?
Just to have, the Franklin's a very small, student newspaper or a small campus. To have people watching you and watching your reporting and counting on it. Even after the initial story broke, especially when we were the only people covering it, it is terrifying to have that many eyes on you when you're not used to it. Because usually, we print our paper and maybe somebody reads it. Mostly, it's professors that read the paper and tell us how great we're doing or whatever. But this time, it was there were students reading and wanting to know what was happening, and then people from outside of Franklin and all over the state. So. But it was a little comforting, just because it made me feel like, there is a purpose to doing this, because we're telling a story that people need to know.
Alex.
Yeah, and
then it looks like Kate right after.
Oh,
No, you go first, Alex,
okay.
But I could see Kate leaning in, too.
And I think there's like a difference that I feel between, like when we talk about eyes, like eyes on your work and eyes on you. And you know, there's been times when I've been really lucky to have like a lot of readership and interest and reaction to the work that we've done. But the times when I feel like you get that kind of like paranoia feeling that you're talking about, Cole, is when it shifts to like eyes on you, the person behind it, which I think is a faster shift for student journalists than with like other outlets. I think it's quicker for people to, and sometimes it's done in like a way that is like, I think well-intentioned and positive, of like, look at this like Scooby-Doo thing of like the kids like doing something good. But it quickly, I don't know, when I've had times when I've learned that like different like administrators and figures that I knew were more aware of like perceiving me and my work as I'm doing it, not so much like reading the finished product. I think that's a really uncomfortable feeling, but I don't really, I don't know, I'm comforted when we do publish something and it does get a good response, because that kind of, I think, makes it worth doing if people are reading it and developing opinions based on it and informing themselves with it.
Kate.
Yeah, so disclaimer, I did not look at the numbers because I thought I was going to get sued, so that didn't really matter to me at first. I knew I'd win the case if I did get sued, but I was really thinking about the next steps. I knew that the numbers weren't going to really matter that much, because numbers are just numbers. It matters the community that it affects, and music, especially the music community, is so niche. It is such a small subsect of people. When you look at, like, for example, football, like this made the rounds on like the music subreddits, and there was a few things on campus that did get canceled that a certain professor was in. A quote that she said was taken out of context is that she called Chris Parker, the main guy, a victim, and people were kind of perpetrating that. Professors were saying that was taken out of context. So what we did is we published the transcript of the interview with the audio online, and we're like, this is not taken out of context. So really, like, I wasn't on the defensive. I was more looking for what's next, because in the aftermath, Indiana University called a student into a meeting, of which one of Chris Parker's family members' family friends was there, who was a IU administrator, telling him to not push a critical letter. So there was another investigation shortly after, talking about how IU was pushing students to not protest, to not have an open letter, which eventually published in the IDS. And, you know, the stories didn't rack up like, you know, the most views ever. But there was a lot of engagement, and there was a lot of people who were really upset about this. And to me, I don't really boast about views that much, just because I think that those can be taken in any different way. They could be bots, they could be any sort of thing. But I sat in on town halls, I sat in on listening sessions, and the people who were most upset about this were people at other universities who saw that Parker either taught there or was thinking about teaching there. He wants to go into academia. He's now singing in Turkey, I think, not singing, playing in Turkey. But there was a lot of people who were concerned about this going on in their own community and sharing their own, you know, stories on Reddit and things like that. And I just found like a new one the other day where people were talking about this. So I don't, like, part of me, I know a lot of people, I was just talking to one of my sources the other day where she was like, I feel like nothing came out of this. And I'm like, well, that's not the point. The point is to tell the story and to be a record. So when this does happen again, you can go and point to something in the past. And that was another thing that I embarked on when I reported the story, is that I found that IU was not giving sexual assault records out to students, to people who request them, that there are certain sexual assault records that should be given over according to Indiana code. And Washington and North Carolina fought for this and went to court, to fight for this, and they won. And so I did the same thing in Indiana. So we can point back and say, yes, you know, massive change did not happen because of this. It didn't rack up the most page views ever, but we can now more easily access sexual assault records. We can point to, this is the third story that's happened in the Jacob School, or happened because of an abuse case in the Jacob School of Music in the past 10 years. And unfortunately, this is something that continues to happen on IU's campus.
Yes, I'm curious. If you're reporting on the on the university, how do you get insulated so that the pressure doesn't overwhelm you? Because I was a line journalist, you cover mayors, that kind of thing, and they'll come after you. I mean, they'll have their people come after you, but my paper would support me. Mm-hmm. Your situation, you're a student. You gotta pass classes and that kind of stuff. What's the mechanism by which you're supported, if at all? It's a selfish question because I've been asked to advise. My college does not have a journalism department. My alma mater has asked me to advise students for their papers. And I'd like to say, well, yeah, if the dean of the college is caught with a goat, report that he's been caught with a goat. But they're scared. He's the dean of the college. Are there structures to protect the students?
I would say that there was a lot of professors that I tapped into. There was actually a journalism professor, which I didn't write about this, but she was a family friend of Chris Parker's family, and she pulled me aside, went through a weird avenue, and told me to drop it, and that it was high school drama. So I reported it to the chair of our department, and I'm never going to know what happened, but I had strong systems at IU where our director of student media was on my side and knew everything that was going on the entire time. Also, while this was happening, and is still happening, the university is kind of playing around with pulling funding from the student newspaper. So, while this wasn't this is going to directly happen to me, we've had a number of very critical stories that presented the facts, and it's still hovering around us you might not have the resources to do that in the future. It's never been directly said, but I would say that I had a good amount of student editors that were behind me. The Student Press Law Center, I think, is the single biggest resources that students don't know they have. I worked there, the Student Press Law Center, so that's how I found out that I could.
I want to drive home that point because when Cole said they only had one lawyer, it turned out it was a volunteer lawyer because he was on your publishing board, right? Me? Yeah, you, Cole.
Yeah. We had.
And that is one of the problems that student journalists have is the legal counsel often will be the college or the university's counsel. So they don't get access to legal counsel that is representing exclusively their interests. So anyhow, I want to take that. Yeah, go ahead, Alex.
You should also check with, I don't know what state your college is in.
Pennsylvania.
Yeah, I'm not sure what their press association is, but I know for us in Michigan, the Michigan Press Association, they have a service that's like a legal hotline where you can get advice, especially for public records requests for writing appeals, and for student members, they offer it for free. So we've been able to get a lot of legal help, not just from the SPLC, but also from our state press association. And I think a few other states have that as well. So you should check with the association to see if they would help you out.
Actually, the question's a little different. What I'm asking is, how do you report independently on an agency, a college, that has power over you?
Yeah. No, I understand. I think I wasn't 100% answering the question.
It's illegal if they do anything different. If they treat you any differently, that's illegal pretty much. Discrimination. We did a lot of stuff with the law, and we were pretty afraid what was going to happen to me. But I'm pretty sure if you know your rights and you know that what you're doing is correct, and you know what you're doing is not defamation or libel, then the university should have no issue with what you're doing. I know they're going to have issue, but yeah.
but I don't want to minimize. There was a story out of Northern Ohio where they didn't go after the students, but they fired the newspaper advisor. The college dismissed, which is often the way that they respond to these things when they don't like it. Anyhow, yeah. Well, you're on the bubble now.
I think we've found that sometimes you kind of just have to rely on like finding friendly faces in the administration who will be willing to call out their colleagues if they're acting inappropriately. And I'm probably the wrong person to ask about this just because MSU is so big that I don't really interact with anybody that I'm writing on other than with like my kind of journalism hat on. But the few times that I've written about like the residential college that I'm in, and at one point there was somebody who was like, I'm gonna call our dean on you or whatever. And there just happened to be somebody in the press office at Michigan State who was sort of a friendly face who talked to them, and then we ended up getting a letter of apology and made sure that there wasn't like anything improper going on for me. But if you can identify individuals, because I think most people in universities aren't looking to like get student journalists, and so I don't know, we've had success in the past with identifying people in the administration who aren't into that kind of thing and have been able to have been figures to approach their colleagues about not doing that when they do. Does that make sense at all?
So Kate mentioned town halls. I'm curious about the aftermath of these controversies or tragedies and the efforts to make space to process, space for discussion, for action steps. What did you see happening? Either like, was it from administration? Was it from campus groups? And was it effective? And was it a good place to report?
I think this was 3 years ago. We were at a time when it happened. A lot of students weren't on campus, but we were getting a lot of emails about counseling services being available, and I don't think we had a town hall or anything, but those were made available, and we would report on that. But I was nervous about coming back because when we were here, and when this happened during our January term, not everybody was on campus, like I had said. So we were all going to come back in February, and I was nervous. Like, what was it going to be like? And honestly, it felt kind of normal. So that's why I also felt the need to continue telling the story, because I didn't want people to forget about it. Not that, the college was trying to brush it under the rug, but it was just, I didn't want people to forget, like, this is still going on. He's still going through this court process. And it was kind of easy. I could see how it could be easy to forget as an average student, especially since he was arrested in another state. You could just turn a blind eye. But there were counseling services offered. When it initially happened, like when I was on a school trip, our professors with us had said, if you need to talk to anybody, let us know. That's kind of what I remember. But it was pretty normal when we came back. So, yeah.
So I've got I'm kind of curious on something. Each of you represent a journalism school from a different school, and I'd be kind of curious to hear if your journalism professors, your student journalism advisors, your newspaper advisors were actually true journalists, or were they people who studied journalism and never conducted the practice of journalism, never worked for a paper or TV or radio station or did that? And part of the reason I'm asking is I wonder the level of support and pushing, especially for the young lady from IU, where she had somebody within the department who was not so, or was very reticent on moving forward. So,
Well, since you shouted me out, I'll go first. Most of the professors were or are working in the field. I will say they are veteran journalists. We don't have a lot of young blood, I would say, in our program. But as for the IDS, most of our professional staff had worked there for a pretty long time. And some of them at one point were IDSers, or the Indiana Daily Student called it the IDS. Like, I think Melinda was there for she's been there for over 40 years. She never really worked in the field. I think same with our director. He's just organized, oversaw. But the main advisor who helps us with stories, she did work in the field. She works for the HSPA. She does way too much, and I don't know, that woman does not get paid enough. But yeah.
the Daily Northwestern is pretty much independent of Northwestern. We rely on donations. We have we lease a space from the university and a van, but that's basically the connection. So we have a publishing board who have varying expertise in journalism, but really we're self-directed. Now our professors, people that we rely on for experience in the classroom, they're veterans of the industry, but the actual Daily Northwestern, we're completely self-directed, and so that's what gives us license to do really important work, I think, and gives us the ability to ask the tough questions that without fear that the administration is going to respond to us. But that's also puts pressure on us, and the pressure that I was talking about of, look, this is your story, this is your reporting, you have to take ownership of it. There's not an administration with a deep-pocketed administration behind you to protect you if something went wrong. Now, there isn't that administration to come after you if you do something that angers them, but they're also not there to protect you. And so it's up to you. It's up to trusting yourself and kind of leaning on the wisdom from those veterans of the industry around you at the school to make those decisions, I think.
Yeah, so I'm not in the School of Journalism at MSU, so I can't really speak to the professors, like what kind of experience or background they come from. But I'll say at the State News, we're like the Daily Northwestern, it's an independent nonprofit. Our general manager, he has a background in student media, but not in professional journalism. He's like an MBA who runs kind of the business side. But I think I think the most helpful part of our newsroom for me has been we have an advisor who, she actually is a State News alum. She wrote there when she was in college, and then she worked in Florida and Connecticut and Ohio at all these different papers for many years as an editor and as a reporter. And that's been an incredible asset for me having her there, just because, it's great to have somebody to go to who has done this on a professional level for so long and is such an expert in like anything you need. You can kind of go and she knows what to do, and that's a really good thing. And I can't imagine, as much as it is, she doesn't have any editorial say. It's all students running the paper and developing the product and like developing the stories. But I can't imagine doing it without somebody who can like have that sort of level of professional advice to give you like, this is what's done in the professional world, especially in helping you understand like what's weird and not weird about the whole two-hat student journalist thing. Having somebody who can tell you like these are best practices for professional journalists and then help you find how can you get as close to that as possible while still also being a full-time student and doing this weird double thing.
I was glad we did have guidance from professors who had experience in the field, like John and Janet Williams, who was editor of the State House File at the time. The State House File is separate from the Franklin, which is the student newspaper, but the State House File is also run by usually the same students who work for the Franklin. So John and Janet were instrumental in providing guidance for us, especially because we had to learn, like I'd never really covered court proceedings before or really been in a courtroom as a reporter. So Janet had experience covering courts, so she was very helpful. And here's what documents you need to get, and here's what you need to ask for, here's what you need to pay attention to when you are in the courtroom. So we were she didn't come with us to Wisconsin, but we were on the phone with her quite a bit when we were there. Just what do we need to ask the prosecutor for? What should we be listening for? So we had some really good guidance, and which also kind of pushed us to kind of help us understand what we needed to be doing to report this story well.
Yeah, so these are really big events that you guys have had to report on, and obviously you guys were or are students currently. We've had a lot of, journalism-based questions, but how did you balance reporting this really big thing on top of being a full-time student? I know you mentioned something about like taking off the hat, different, but there had to be some sort of miscommunication between those two.
Don't all leap at the question
It
at
was
once.
definitely hard, especially in the situation I was in at first when the story broke. I was in Disney World, but I was still taking a class and I had assignments I had to complete. that day. And so that involved using my phone. So my phone was about to die, but I had this obligation, this duty that I was like, I have to report this story. But I also can't neglect my duties as a student, even though this is like a fun trip. But we would get so many worksheets. It was crazy. It was hard to balance because I felt like I needed to like leave and like go back and get my laptop in my hotel room, but I didn't. Being a student and trying to manage those duties and having to leave class to go to Wisconsin, it's just something you have to learn how to balance. I don't know if anybody else has a better answer.
Yeah, I don't know. That's something I'm still working on and trying to figure out. I think every week since like the start of spring semester last year and then this semester, I'll tell like my editor and advisor like I'm gonna do it, and then next week I'm gonna go back to being like a full-time student and just doing this like a little bit. And that week has never come. When like so, I don't know. I think I probably don't have a healthy relationship to it just because I do like. I don't know. It's the most exciting thing I do is like the work. It's like so much more exciting than my classwork, so it kind of like comes first for me, which is like not great. I don't think my professors would love that. I definitely don't try and give them that impression. But I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out how to have like a healthy thing where I'm like a full-time student and a part-time reporter because it's so much more fun. Like,
I think this summer we were talking about how I didn't have any classes. I wasn't a student, but what I was this summer was like a glorified camp counselor for a bunch of high schoolers at the same time when I was doing this, and that's how. And so this is being a reporter was basically my night job, and watching these kids was the day job, and so that presented a bunch of different weird interactions, but to keep it short, I think one thing that I regretted during that story was that I had to abandon like my job and my responsibility, and one of my coworkers, got to give them a shout out, Juliet Allen, covered my Slack or picked up my Slack. You got to have some of those people that help you out when you have to go in depth with this type of stuff. But I really regretted kind of leaving these kids behind, even though I had hoped that they would get something from watching me do this process, or get some inspiration. But I knew, but a couple days in, I knew I had to get back to them, and so my balance was really just like trying to prioritize the story and them, and not really myself. I didn't really sleep, didn't really eat that much other than the DoorDash. But I could do that because I knew in 2 weeks they would be gone, and I didn't expect the story to be going as strongly in those 2 weeks also. And so I thought that kind of the world had given me this kind of boundary of 2 weeks where it would probably settle down. I would go home. I would be not in the thick of it anymore. I wouldn't be with these kids. That I could say, okay, I'm going to sacrifice my own life for these 2 weeks to prioritize these two things I really care about, and then I can get back to it, right? And so it doesn't have to be, you don't have to be balancing it at all times, you know? And I went fully in depth on the journalism and the camp counselor thing for those 2 weeks, and then I went to Oregon, took a little vacation afterwards. And so, but the lesson there is you don't necessarily need to just be balancing it day to day. You can, as long as you're disciplined and kind of set those limits for yourself, I found that I can create balance from week to week, month to month, rather than trying to do it day to day.
I agree, because I feel like sometimes you have to like see where your boundaries are to know to not cross them again. My favorite thing that my advisor told me and my friend, because we are overachievers, is that we're juggling 7 balls, but we think we can juggle 9. And so when I was reporting that story, I was also managing editor, and I also volunteered to be enterprise editor because we didn't have one. And that is why I got a D+ in Intro to Python. So I guess like I know now like what my boundaries are, and I did have to fail some classes. One class. I had to fail one class to know where my boundary was. And that sucked. And I was like, you know what? I need to know where my mental health needs to be. I need to know, like, I need to finish my degree. And, you know, I kind of, it's not a great advice, but I kind of needed to see that, to know that, to not do that again and to not go into that terrain. And honestly, some of my friends saw me and they're like, we're not going to do that. And I was like, good. No, don't do 2 positions at once and do an investigation and take 18 credit hours, because that's what I did. And I did not have a great time. 0 out of 10 recommend. But I think that knowing what you're capable of and pushing yourself earlier on, being like, maybe I can write 2 news stories this week. So when you do have that big story come up, you're like, I can handle this, or I need help. I don't know if that's great advice, but that's what I wish I could do. And after I did that story and realized what my workload was and what I didn't want my workload to be, it's been a lot easier of a transition into my professional career. Because after that, I was editor-in-chief, and I said, I will be there at 8:30 in the morning. I woke up at 8:30 in the morning as a college student, and I went to the office, and I worked as editor-in-chief, and I went home at 6 p.m. and had classes in between, and then I helped as needed into the night. But I would not have done that and not have had a social life if I didn't go through the ringer.
All I gotta say is I did also struggle in my intro to Python class, but I wasn't doing a huge investigation at the same time, so.
This is not the end of the conversation. There is a bar set out. There's going to be a reception out here. You can wander back in here and sit with drink in hand. 2 important things to remember about the bar, because we do have college students here. You will need an ID, a real ID, showing that you are at least 21 years old. The other thing is, it is a cash bar. So it's not credit cards or anything like that. So you actually have to have cash. I am sure that they would be more than willing to continue the conversation and get out from under these lights. And those chairs actually aren't all that comfortable. So I would suggest that we do that. But before we do that, please join me in thanking this great panel for a wonderful conversation.